Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And we turn our attention in a moment to comments that are widely being construed from the Queen as being about Brexit. I think they almost certainly are. Problem with any comments about Brexit, as people who listen to this programme know better than anyone, people will hear what they want to hear. So while she calls for an end to the Brexit feud, as the Times put it, I imagine, I haven't heard it or witnessed it yet, to me it's fairly obvious that when she talks about tried and tested recipes, she's warning against leaping into the unknown, which is, of course, what Brexit represents, whether we have a deal or not. There's more unknown with no deal. But I imagine, such are the mental contortions that Brexiters have to undertake at the moment, as everything falls apart. I imagine that you've got people on that side of the argument who see this as somehow supportive of their position. And that's the madness distilled, isn't it? Something a little unpleasant has happened in the last few weeks. I don't know if you've noticed this, but when cabinet-level politicians or senior politicians start warning that the far right will surge if Brexit is stopped, then you have gone down a very dark hole. The problem is you don't fall down the hole. You get lowered very slowly into it, and you only realise you're at the bottom and you can't get out when the rope has been lifted back out again without you being on the end of it. Just imagine any other country that is enacting a policy proven to be in direct contradiction of the expectations of everybody who voted for it. We must enact it, otherwise the fascists might revolt. That is government by terrorism, government by threat. And it is astonishing. Chris Grayling was on the front of one newspaper a couple of weekends ago. I gather that Sue Ellen Braverman made similar points on Question Time, either last night or last week. And that's amazing. You've got senior, mainstream, elected parliamentarians saying, no, we have to do this, otherwise the fascists will revolt. The far right will surge. So two questions immediately spring to mind. Why on earth is Brexit something beloved of the far right? I mean, if it is, as Suella Braverman appears to be suggesting, surely that's the point at which you ask yourself how you ended up on the same side as the far right, the fascists, who you apparently fear. That, for me, would be a logical response. Second question is, how the hell did we end up ever contemplating enacting unpopular policy proven to be in direct contradiction of the expectations of everyone who voted for it? We're going to do something that we all know will be damaging. Some people are still pretending the damage is a price worth paying for unspecified gifts and presents, but we all accept now that it's going to be damaging. And we've got to crack on with it, because otherwise Oswald Mosley's heirs will be upset and angry. Otherwise knuckle-dragging Neanderthals might somehow go on a little march. That's incredible. But it's a perfect illustration of the gaslighting of an entire nation, the slow, incremental creep towards really, really dark and ugly places. You don't get dropped into them from 100 feet screaming all the way down. You get very gently led into them, not noticing all the signposts and warnings from history, until suddenly I sit here and say to you, we've got cabinet ministers saying that we've got to do our politics because otherwise the fascists will get cross. And this is the United Kingdom in 2019. And there'll be people who consider themselves educated and civilised who are cheering and nodding along to the suggestion that we should act unpopular policies built upon lies and ignorance, because if we don't, ignorant liars might get violent. It's actually incredible. And it's why, much as I would like to welcome the Queen's intervention and indeed endorse it and enact it, I don't know that we can, because what is the common ground? I'll give you a couple of examples. Great scenes on the BBC last night where a chap called James, I always call him Claypole, his name is Dellingpole. Claypole's a fella off Rent-A-Ghost, isn't he? Might have lost the younger portion of the audience there. He's essentially a sort of strange climate change blogger who, because these positions aren't very popular, but they are quite provocative, you can make a half-decent living saying absolutely ludicrous things. So he's a sort of climate change blogger who works for the far-right website Breitbart. And he ended up on Andrew Neil's programme last night, punting that line that you've heard people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and others punt that WTO terms is either a meaningful or a desirable destination. Andrew Neil, who is brilliant at the job he does on the BBC, it's just a shame that if BBC impartiality rules were consistently applied across the board, he wouldn't be allowed to work there, because he publishes The Spectator magazine, where this Delingpole character also works. But he showed no fear or favour last night. It's important to recognise that. And he did what I didn't manage to do the other day with Jacob Rees-Mogg, because I struggled to get a word in edgeways, frankly. But this is what happens when you properly examine somebody who claims that the World Trade Organization terms offer anything remotely attractive to post-Brexit Britain.
Let me ask you this. If we leave just on the World Trade terms, the goods that we produce, the farm produce we produce, that we export to the EU, they would face tariffs.
Yeah.
At the moment, there are none. That will hit our business and farms.
But the European market is shrinking as a share of the global economy.
But it's still 500 million.
Yeah. And it's going to carry on shrinking.
Well, hold on. It may be shrinking. It's not shrinking that. So let's just take sheep farmers. France takes 50% of British lamb exports. There's no tariffs. We leave on WTO terms. They face 40% tariffs on most cuts. End of British sheep farming.
I'm sure we'll find a way.
But they can't give
What would that way
to
be for our viewers watching tonight?
I'm not familiar with the workings of the sheep market, I'm afraid.
But Andrew,
James,
can I just...
my point on this is, you said, I'm sure we'll find a way.
Yeah.
That what you're doing is you're playing fast and loose with people's livelihoods. And that is what is the problem with this. And not only that, politically, you could usher in a Corbyn government because the shock to the system is so great. No government, responsible government, should impose these problems on the citizens that people vote for a Corbyn government which you don't want.
Are you saying he's a secret Corbynista?
I'm saying
I'm just saying that he will not get what he wants.
The surest way of getting a Corbyn government right now, speaking from the perspective of your party and my party, come to mention it, is if you fail to deliver the promise that you made to the people who voted in the referendum. You promised to deliver on their vote, and you are not doing so. Anything less than no deal is a failure to deliver on that promise.
Look, okay, our manifesto promised that we would have an orderly exit from the EU, and we will give clarity and certainty to business. Your no-deal scenario is not orderly, it gives no clarity, and it gives no certainty. Why do you tumble out onto WTO and then, in a weaker position, try to negotiate?
It may have been brilliant, but I tried it twice and I didn't get an answer.
You didn't get an answer?
No.
If we leave on WTO rules, would we then still unilaterally have zero tariffs on everything coming in from the EU the way it is now?
I'm not sure. I just know.
No, I don't think you can you? They can't give you preferential tariffs to the UK.
We're gonna take a hit.
So we would have to put tariffs on
things. It's a hit worth taking.
Did you say that to people during the referendum, that we're going to take a hit, and it's a hit worth taking?
I think everyone out there right now in the country who voted Leave is not thinking, you know, what we really voted for was kind of half in, half out.
That's not what I'm asking. Did you tell people that their jobs could be on the line? Did you tell people during the campaign that they could take a hit?
Brochure.
No, but you're saying that you're going to take a hit as though we all take a hit. Did you tell people that?
I'm saying that you can't leave the European Union without consequences. Inevitably, like in a divorce, there's going to be
question.
issues.
As far as I understand, if we leave without a deal and then we're on WTO rules, then we cannot be given preferential treatment in terms of any tariffs. Because that's against the way that organisation works. So therefore, when you say take a hit,
we trade on the same terms that America trades with the EU on, or
this WTO
China.
thing is a red herring, right? We are 80% services economy, right? We're 20% goods. WTO covers goods. It doesn't cover services.
Right, mind you, the single market doesn't cover services
but
that much.
We need to address.
But let me ask, just get this clear. If we did leave on WTO rules, we would have to put tariffs on things coming in from Europe. Because if we didn't, if we continued tariff-free, we would then have to be tariff-free to the whole world. Under your WTO rules, you can't pick and choose.
Exactly.
If there's no tariff on what you're giving me or exporting, there'll be no tariffs on what he's doing.
Yep.
So, and if you did that, why would anybody do a free trade deal?
That's the base position. That's the starting position. Then
Yeah.
you negotiate from there. I
But
mean,
why-
President Trump has already said that he's happy to give us a fantastic
No,
deal.
let me just clarify this. If
can't even make a State of Union
already, if because I've given the Europeans a no tariff access to the British market, under your WTO rules, I have to give the Americans tariff-free access as well. Why would they need to do a free trade deal? They've got the free trade.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, well that's honest, and on that we'll move on. Thank you.
Fair play to the fella. He got there in the end. I don't know the answer to that, or indeed anything. And that is the ERG, the hard right, the Tufton Street position. And then they can't. I mean, because poor fella there doesn't actually understand it. Your man Patrick Minford does, for all his myriad faults. He does understand it. He knows that this will involve the collapse of manufacturing and industry. He says so. And then his supporters and followers, like that chap there, Clay Delingpole and Rees-Mogg and others, they just hope you won't notice that bit. Where the picture they paint of a positive future is on a canvas that involves the collapse of industry and agriculture. Don't take my word for it. Talk to a sheep farmer in Wales, or talk to the head of Airbus, or the head of Jaguar Land Rover, or the head of Panasonic, or the head of Sony. All of these things, they're just true. So how do you find common ground with someone talking undiluted rollicks? That's the problem that I suspect the Queen has missed here. I'll give you another example. Here's the journalist Owen Jones interviewing the bloke that runs Wetherspoons, Tim Martin, and it has been very kindly suggested that there might be a slight echo of my own work somewhere in here.
Well, the main issue for me is you never knew where EU law started and British law ended.
Which EU law don't you like?
It's too dissective to boil it down to that. Okay,
one law.
Let me give you one example of the EU, okay? There was a huge pressure for us to join the predecessor of the euro, which was the exchange rate mechanism.
That was a voluntary decision. We weren't compelled to join the EU then.
70% of the people thought it was inevitable that the UK would join.
But we didn't join the euro.
I don't like the Eurozone. I think it's very dangerous.
But we're not. I agree, but we're not in the Eurozone.
You shouldn't interrupt me so much if you want a decent reply.
Okay.
You know?
All I say is the reason I'm struggling in it is I think there are many valid criticisms to be made of the EU. But what you haven't come up with a single law you object to from the European Union. And you brought up the Eurozone, which we're not members of. I mean, if the Eurozone goes badly wrong, it's irrelevant whether we're in the EU or not because we're not in the Eurozone. But you're not coming up with a valid criticism. And there are criticisms to be made.
How would I know whether it's an individual law? I'm a barrister. It's almost impossible to know whether an individual law is made by the EU or the UK.
But we've got to leave. Because they're all... It's Groundhog Day. It's no fun for me anymore, in case you're wondering. This must be the single most satisfactory exercise in being proved right in the history of journalism, this radio programme. Genuinely, no false modesty there. It's awful. It's absolutely awful. It's like watching somebody run breakneck. I'll tell you what it's like. It's like having a family member who's in one of those cults that thinks the world is going to end. So they give away everything that they own and they start flagellating themselves every morning before dawn and they fall out with all their friends. And you're sitting there going, mate, the world's not going to end. It's not going to end. Please stop giving away all your stuff. Please stop claiming that it's all going to be worth it. And then the date ticks around where the cult leader has said the world is going to end and you just feel like an idiot. But the person who's told you to stop behaving, to leave the cult, doesn't take any pleasure whatsoever in seeing your life fall apart. It's like this amazing state of affairs where we've got people claiming that it's somehow unpatriotic to be trying to protect the country from idiots and fascists. And then you've got cabinet ministers saying, no, we have to harm the country, otherwise the fascists will get cross. So that's why I don't think there's much common ground. That and the fact that he's pretty much the only businessman left. I know you've got the JCB bloke, but I don't know that his judgment or acumen can really be relied upon until we find out why he's given David Davis £3,000 an hour for advice. David Davis, a man who boasts about not being clever. So what is the common ground? I've got a horrible feeling there isn't any. And to be fair, I think I've spent more time over the last 2.5 years speaking to people on the other side of what would be common ground than anyone else in the country for my sins and my book deal. I may get sent to the Tower. Actually, talking of the Tower, have you been there lately? Tower of London is, I'm sounding a little bit Kidderminstery now, I appreciate, but I lived next door to it for a year and never properly visited. But I took one of the kids during the Christmas holidays and we found a beefeater listening to LBC, had a little earphone in his ear, helped us go. Gave us some very useful advice on where and when the queues would be the longest and the shortest. And I said, are you allowed to do that? They're volunteers, I think, a lot of the yeomen of the guard, or a lot of the, not the actual yeomen of the guard, but the ones that operate as kind of tour helpers or facilitators. I'm not sure, but anyway, he was adamant that he was allowed to have a little earphone in his ear listening to LBC as he went about his duties at the Tower of London. But I hadn't seen the graffiti before. In one of the towers, the rooms where prisoners had carved their names into the plasterwork, and it's still there. And sort of reach out and touch history, really quite incredible. This concludes today's advertisement for the Tower of London Tourist Board. 20 minutes after 11 is the time. At risk of being sent to the Tower, I think Her Majesty has missed the boat today, as she calls for an end to the Brexit feud. This is how the Times interprets it, and talks about the bigger picture, which of course would mean the wider world, and the reliability of tried and tested recipes, which of course would suggest support for the status quo. Even more explicit support for Remain, you could argue, than when she decided to wear a European Union-themed hat to give the Queen's speech. But that's the point. The reason why I think she's wrong, there isn't any common ground, is because of all the people now shouting that hat had nothing to do with the European Union, and the bigger picture doesn't mean the wider world. It means a smaller world, and the tried and tested recipes doesn't mean sticking with what we've currently got. It means doing something completely new and unknown. Now, people will hear what they want to hear. Presumably, that interview on BBC last night between Andrew Neil and James Delingpole, some people are just going to argue it's very snobby. You know, when I get a caller who comes on and they fall apart like Delingpole did on telly last night, and they claim it's because he's stupid, or because he's been carefully selected, or because it's been staged, or it's an actor. And someone who went to public school does it on the telly, someone posh does it. Very different brand of criticism. There's so much snobbery involved in Brexit, so much forelock tugging and cap doffing. It's really been a shock to discover how feudal many people still are in their outlooks to they're not your betters. I went to school with them. They are not your betters. Stop behaving as if they are. They fall apart like that under proper questioning, every single one of them, which means there can't be any common ground. How can people who are not liars have common ground with liars? How can people who understand things have common ground with people who don't understand things? I would love to be wrong, passionately, actually, not just genuinely. But common ground to me would be the national interest. And given that the Brexit side of the argument are now arguing that we're deliberately damaging the national interest in the short term, in the expectation of some unspecified and unguaranteed benefit in the distant future, how can anybody argue that we can even share the national interest? When you have somebody like Sue Ellen Braverman and Chris Grayling publicly stating that we should press ahead with this policy, proven to be the opposite in many cases of what the people who voted for it were promised. We should press ahead with delivering something that nobody voted for. Nobody voted for it might not be that bad after all, or it looks today like there might be some areas that some EU countries want to give us permission to carry on behaving as we behave now. That's not a victory. That's a mitigation of a loss. So where's the common ground between people who aren't xenophobic and people who are xenophobic? Where's the common ground between people who applauded Nigel Farage's despicable Breaking Point poster hours before Joe Cox got murdered, and people who believe that Joe Cox was murdered precisely because of far-right rhetoric and racist politicians? Where's the common ground? I would love to find it. I would love to find the common ground. But you lost, get over it, it's going to hurt, ha ha ha. I mean, the vitriol directed at people who are motivated by the opposite of self-interest has been one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen. Gina Miller gets nothing from insisting that Parliament has a meaningful vote on some of the most important decisions this country has taken in generations. She gets nothing out of that. No positive, no plus, no paycheck. She gets death threats and abuse and insults. Where's the common ground between her and the bloke who threatened to kill her and ended up in jail? Where's the common ground between people who find sub-Nazi propaganda on posters despicable, disgusting and profoundly un-British, and people who cheer it while claiming to be patriotic? Where's the common ground, your Madge? Come on. I appreciate you've probably got remarkable diplomatic skills simply by dint of being a member of the family you're a member of. But where is the common ground? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. What is the common ground? I'm probably too immersed in this whole brouhaha to have a clear vision. Maybe there is common ground. What does it look like? If on one side, cabinet-level politicians are saying, we've got to do this because if we don't, the fascists won't like it. They're not even pretending it's going to be good anymore. You've got that fella on the telly last night, absolutely ignorant. I mean, boneheaded ignorance about what WTO terms. But all he's really doing is parroting stuff that Rees-Mogg has said more plausibly and persuasively. People ring me and repeat these lines about WTO terms. Or what was yesterday's ludicrous red herring? Article 24, come on. Where's the common ground between people who can see that the emperor is naked and people still insisting he's got clothes on? I'd love, I'm turning into Kevin Keegan, I'd love to see the common ground or even smell it, just feel it, believe that it exists. But the people that won have destroyed the common ground because the only alternative is to admit that you were wrong. That there is no common ground between people who are right and people who are wrong. You can see that now because the people who voted for it are saying that the reason it's going badly is all because of the people who said it was going to go badly. Where's the common ground? Adam's in Leeds. Adam, give me some common ground.
I'm sorry, James. I can't help you with that one.
Oh.
I think the reason why we can't have common ground is because the ground keeps changing.
Yes.
On the Brexit side. So it started off with sunny uplands. So it started off with we were going to be great. And
have your cake and eat it. Have your cake and eat it.
James Dyson leaving.
Yes.
James Dyson leaving. It's going to be fine. And one of the things that I said to your producer, we just can't win. You just can't win if you're on the Remain side, or if you want to look at it differently, on the factual side.
But you can't win with facts against lies.
You can't. You've just come out and you've spent a good few minutes discussing all the kind of things, a description of what's happened in the last 2 years, and I'll just beat you by saying Project Fear.
Yes, of course.
I'll say Project Fear, it's all lies, it's all going to be great on the night. And James Dyson's just moved over because he can't get the same deals that he used to whilst he was in the UK, whilst we were part of the EU. Doesn't get the same R&D tax breaks that you used to get because of EU funding. But it's all okay because he voted Brexit. It's almost as if...
Everything's forgivable. Everything's forgivable if you voted Brexit. Tim Martin can't name a single law that the EU has imposed upon this country that he wants to see the back of, but his reason for wanting to leave the EU is all of the laws that the EU has imposed upon this country that he wants to see the back of. But he's all right, he's one of ours. James Dyson can say that Brexit is going to be brilliant for business and then move his own business to Singapore, but that's all right because he's one of us. James Dellingpole can soil himself on live national television, but that's all right because he's one of us. Jacob Rees-Mogg can tour the country speaking unadulterated nonsense, but that's all right because he's one of us. And you lost, Adam. Get over it. Ha ha ha. Dry your eyes, mate.
I think the two things that I really want to say is that we have to change tactic, and
you can't change tactic.
Me to say this, but how do you win? How do you win when they can just come out with downright lies and undermine?
Once the lie has gone into the mainstream, I don't know how you get it back. And this is something that I reflected on yesterday when I was talking to the Anne Frank Trust for very obvious historical parallels and historical reasons. The way that Viktor Orban actually employed political strategists to find him an enemy, going back only 10 years to 2008, two fellas called Finkelstein and Birnbaum brought in, one of them used to work for Nixon, and they just found George Soros and said, here's the fella you need, because if you're a populist and you're making promises that you know you can't keep, you need to give the people a target. Whether it's Brussels, whether it's migrants, whether it's Mexicans, whether it's Muslims, whether it's Jews, or whether it's George Soros, if you're making promises to people that you know you won't be able to keep, you have to give them a bête noire who not only explains why you can't keep your promises because of those pesky Jews or those pesky Muslims or those pesky immigrants or George Bloom in Soros, but of course it also gives them something to focus upon instead of focusing upon your failure to keep your promises.
Absolutely.
So I don't know.
Absolutely.
I don't know what you do when you lie. I remember a lad at school, who I actually know, lived with him, and he voted leave, actually. I might remind him of this story. We shared a house for a year at university, and I only ever saw him lose his temper once. He's the most mild-mannered, decent, calm, wonderful person, one of the best people I know. And I stole his Jaffa cakes one night, and I wouldn't admit it. And it was that abject frustration at knowing I was lying and me refusing to admit it that saw him lose his temper. I've known him since I was 13 years old. I've known him for 34 years. And the only time I've ever seen him lose his temper was when he couldn't break through what we both knew was a lie on my part. And that, my friends, is Brexit. 26 minutes to 12, breaking news story, kind of linked to Brexit. Roger Stone, a key ally of Donald Trump, has been arrested on charges of obstruction, witness tampering and making false statements. The Special Counsel's Office in America has just announced. This follows an indictment by a federal grand jury on the 24th of January in Washington, D.C., said a spokesman for Robert Mueller. So keep a very close eye on that. I interviewed Roger Stone once. I don't think I've taken many calls yet, so I should probably do that rather than share my Roger Stone anecdote with you. Oh, I can hear the groans of disappointment from here. Robert's in Dulwich. Robert, what does the common ground look like?
Hi, James. Yeah, I think you might be maybe chasing up. Is it backing up the wrong tree, they say, with the Queen's comments? I don't know. I don't think she's trying to tell people you've all got to agree, but in the process... What
does common ground mean, then?
Well, I think what she's actually saying, if you could just not interrupt me all the time, that'd be great.
What does common ground mean, Robert? What does common ground mean?
When you debate someone,
yes,
you agree on certain points in the discussion. What the Queen, with her experience and all the rest of it, she doesn't want to see the country split like this. She wants people to enter into dialogues. And if I may say, James, if you keep insulting people and calling them names and all the rest of it and saying that they're wrong,
yes,
that's not how you win people over to your argument.
Oh, you're telling me. Because you know that if someone is lying and they won't admit that they're lying, as we've just established with the great Jaffa Cakes example, there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. So what does common ground mean?
So I would say what the Queen is trying to say, and I think dismissing her is perhaps a bit naive on your behalf, because I think she is quite an experienced lady.
Fifth time. What does common ground mean?
Yeah, I think she's trying to say that if two honest people were to enter into a debate and have a discussion and set out how they see things, you would start identifying common points.
But you're talking about honest people.
Well, and of course, if someone's dishonest, then they're not going to be honest.
But then that's all of all of the Brexiters then shouldn't be part of this process because they're all dishonest.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean. When you say all the Brexiters,
well, let's run through a few. Let's run through a few examples then. There's David Davis, who said there will be no downside to Brexit. There will only be an upside. You've got, the list is almost endless. You've got Liam Fox saying the trade agreement should be the easiest deal in history. Davis again saying that we'll be in Berlin the day after the vote, not in Brussels. You've got, in fact, you name a Brexiter and I'll give you an example of their dishonesty. Name your favourite.
And again, I think you're just completely missing the point.
No, go on. Just name your favourite.
Well, if you take a single lie out of context, it doesn't work.
They need us more than we need them.
You're not being honest. No, you're not being honest, James, right now.
So these words were not uttered by the people I said uttered them.
Of course they were uttered.
Yes, and this is why there is no common ground. I've said something that's true, and you've said I'm not being honest. Do you see that you've proved both of our points? There can't be any common ground. I say something true. You, presumably as a Brexiter, say you've not been honest, and that's why there is no common ground, Robert.
You're avoiding the context because you're trying to make a very narrow point.
Yes, exactly. I've said things that are true, and you said I'm not honest.
No, that's not debate, James. That's not how you debate someone.
So is what I said true?
Understand someone's position. Can you let me talk?
I am listening to you talk, but I can't let you talk. I can't let you talk unchallenged when you talk nonsense because we're looking for the common ground.
How would you know what I'm trying to say?
You just said that I'm not being honest, so I'm picking up on your own. I'm listening to your words.
Well, let me explain that.
Go on then.
Let me explain that.
But before you explain it, is what I said true?
No, what you said is not true.
So David Davis didn't say there will be no downside, there will only be upside.
Yes, he did say that.
So what I said was true.
Can I explain it? No, it's not true. Can I explain that?
So he said it, I said he said it, but it's not true. Go on, fill your boots. Fill your boots.
You understand he was trying to make a point. All of these quotes you give me, there was a context to the conversation. And this is the honest debate that the Queen is trying to get to. Simply insulting people is not going to win people around to your point of view, James. It's just not mature.
You're just repeating yourself. Can you explain to me how what I said... Robert, sorry? Can you explain to me...
You just interrupt the whole time. Why don't you listen to what I called in to say?
I just did, and I'm asking you to tell me what I've said.
You don't even know my point.
Yes, I do know your point.
Talk without you interrupting.
OK, you carry on again, then.
You think you're always right. You know, it's a psychological condition. Someone who thinks they're always right and has got no idea what people think around them. Recently, you said you don't have to debate with people because you know you're right. Why don't you just listen?
I've never said that.
I've got to say.
I've never said that.
Yes, you have.
No, I haven't. I've said I won't conduct debates with people without fact-checkers being present, precisely because otherwise both sides can claim that they're right when only one side can be. So we'll go again, Robert. No, mate, you're going to keep accusing me of interrupting you, and I can't get a word in edgeways. No, you go again, then.
Shall we let the Queen have... Shall we try and examine what the Queen's trying to say?
I know what the Queen's trying to say.
Oh, well,
the Queen is trying to say that people like you and me can find common ground. And we can't, because you will say that I'm not being honest. I'll say, is what I said true? You'll say yes. I'll say, how am I being honest? And you'll say, stop interrupting me. So there's no way we can find common ground. That's clear.
It's what that guy was trying to say. And that's the point in a debate. There's a nuance. And you have to understand the other person's point of view. You have to give them time to let them explain themselves. Because we all know that a word can have a very strict meaning, a broader meaning. So when someone's trying to create an argument, you have to really try and understand, and you have to legitimately and honestly try and understand.
I've been doing it for 2.5 years. Talk me through the tangible benefits of Brexit before you go.
No, you know what? You know why that doesn't even count anymore? We had the vote. That's done.
And that's why there's no common ground. There aren't any tangible benefits. The true things that you're saying, James, are dishonest, and there's no point having a debate because of the result of the vote, despite the fact that all the promises that were made in pursuit of those votes have been broken. So, I mean, listen, I doubt we're going to part as friends, but we're on the same team here, mate. There is no common ground because you don't have a leg to stand on, and you're furious with people who point it out. And until we can find some way of making you feel better about not having a leg to stand on, and me being less frustrated by the fact that you can come on national radio, accuse me of not telling the truth, and then in the same breath say you are actually telling the truth, I just don't like the truth, and anyway, you lost, get over it, then there's no common ground. So can we at least agree on that, Robert?
No, I think...
No, of course we can't. They can't really prove it any more conclusively than that. Matt's in the Elephant and Castle. There is no common ground, Matt.
No, there isn't. And I just want to say, James, if racists and fascists are unhappy with what the government's doing, good. Screw them.
Well, that used to be a fairly uncontroversial comment, didn't it? But now, at cabinet level, you've got, oh, no, we've got to do this because otherwise the racists and the fascists will be unhappy. How have we ended up there?
Well, basically, I'll tell you, there's two reasons. One, because Brexit has opened a massive can of worms with permission for the far right to go further with their dog whistles. But obviously the hostile environment was part of that process. But secondly, the major reason why the Tories, specifically the Tories, care, but also some of the Leave voting Labour MPs, and some of them might be acting for ideological reasons.
There aren't many Leave voting Labour MPs. You've got Caroline Flint. Most of them, although we have our suspicions, are keeping their hands in their pockets.
Sure, but what I'm saying is the reason why most of the Tory, the reason why the non-ideological MPs are saying we must put up with the racism, I'm not talking about the legitimate fears of people who are in areas that have been left behind by globalization, but unfortunately that's mixed in with the racism, yeah?
Yes, of course.
The problem is that first past the post means you cannot move yourself to the left or to the right, depending, too much because you are stuck with geographical seats. And if you have a margin of 5%, 5,000, let's say, in, I don't know, somewhere in Somerset, but I know Rees-Mogg's in a safe seat. There are lots and lots of margins where if the racists do not vote Tory, the Tories will lose. It's not that Labour or a left-wing party will get the majority. It's that those votes will go to UKIP.
Yeah, but then Labour is also paying a lot of attention to so-called Leave voters who they can't afford to alienate. It's as if this small rump of people that you describe as racists, and I would probably concur, have somehow ended up holding the steering wheel. And when you look for common ground, you inevitably run up against the last fella. Says, you're not being honest, James. Is what I said true? Yes, but you're not being honest. So that is the logical... Is it a logical fallacy? That's where the Queen, sadly, has no idea just how entrenched and how stubborn this whole argument has become. Here are some things that are true. They're not true. No, but here I'll prove that they're true. Ah, yes, but context. No, these are things that people have said. They are true, and they have been proven to be false. It's true that they said them. What they said was false. How can you make common ground with someone who stole your Jaffa cakes but refuses to admit that they stole your Jaffa cakes? Ruth is in West Hampstead. Ruth, help me out.
Yeah, James, I normally agree with you on pretty much everything, but I'm actually going to slightly disagree with you this time, I think.
You think there is common ground?
Well, I do. I run a meetup group.
Go on. Yes.
Yeah, I run a meetup group, especially geared to Remainers. We've got lots and lots of members, but we're usually sort of 10, 15 people going out for beers and discussing Brexit and backstops and all things Brexit related. And one of the people that came along a while ago that I know quite well said, do you mind if I bring my friend? I'm not going to get to see him unless he comes along with me, but he did vote leave.
Yes.
So I asked everybody that was coming along that night, were they okay with it? Because I knew there were some people that definitely wouldn't be okay with it. And that's, that's their decision. But, yeah, I mean, the odd EU national that feels, very strongly that,
sure. Okay,
their life's been so affected. So it's very difficult for them to sit down and have a beer with somebody that's a leaver. But I have to say it was probably the best night that I've spent with the group. And we were able to talk about Brexit. And because we were in a situation where we were relaxed, there was a little bit of, toing and froing.
Also, it was 50 against 1, which probably made it
not 50, 15.
All right, 15 against 1. I just a little bit tabloid.
Not even.
So
by the end of the evening,
what would the common ground? How would you describe the common ground?
I think the common ground was finding out that despite the fact that we had differences with Brexit, and he was an unusual Brexiter because his reasons were not, he's got a wife from Thailand who say he wants freedom of movement from everywhere, not just the EU, which is slightly ridiculous. But
he's not going to get that with Brexit.
But the common ground was that we just found that we had, as Joe Cox would say, more in common. We talked about other things as well. So it enabled us to discuss Brexit in a way that wasn't so heated. And he was then inside our bubble and outside of his Leave bubble. And I think that's part of the problem. We've got these two bubbles, and without any interaction, sides are just not changing, and I think that's actually quite dangerous.
It's incredibly dangerous, but I mean, your positive experience notwithstanding, he's not someone who believes things that have been proven to be false. That's where there's no common ground. There's sensible leaders, but ultimately it will always come down to, I know you are, but what am I? Or I'm not a liar, you're a liar. Or, yes, but the result of the vote makes you wrong. And that is all that is left. So if you're dealing with someone who is susceptible to reason, you can find common ground. But that ship sailed some time ago.
Well, maybe, but I do think that I think the dialogue is being driven by people on Twitter, for instance, and Facebook that are so rabid that we're in danger of thinking that they make up 50% of Brexiters, and I don't think they do.
No, of course they don't. Of course they don't. It's 15 to 20%. It always was. But of course, everything is so entrenched now that everybody else has to admit that they were wrong and misled by the 15 to 20%.
No, it's so nice. But your mate, I do have friends like that, and it is really, really frustrating.
There is no common ground. But your friend, he voted for Brexit because he wants freedom of movement to be enhanced and increased. You have to explain. I mean, he has to, and this is where maybe I get too stubborn. He has to admit that that's not going to happen. Therefore, his vote was a mistake.
He has actually said to his friend, apparently, that he would vote Remain now.
Well, then you've spoilt my fun entirely. You were supposed to be bringing common ground, and your example of common ground was a leaver who now realises he was wrong, Ruth. That's not quite what Her Majesty has in mind. Although it's probably the closest that the rest of us can conceive of common ground, unless you're going down the route that says, you're a liar. I know you are, but what am I? And you lost, get over it. Where's the common ground with those people? All right, here we go. Let's go all in on this one. Ruth's absolutely right. Absolutely bang on the money. The only common ground is the ground that leavers move towards as they realise they were wrong. And we're already there, so it's common. Stop interrupting me while I say things that aren't true. That is, if you will, the slogan of Brexit itself, certainly in the context of media discussion. Stop interrupting me. Stop talking over me while I say things that aren't true. Stop proving that what I'm saying isn't true. And that's why I can't see any common ground. How do you have a conversation with somebody who is saying things that aren't true, but refusing to concede that they're not true? I told you what would happen with James Dyson earlier this week. It would be 10 minutes before people started trying to claim that arguing that Brexit would be brilliant for business and then moving your own business out of Britain days before Brexit happens is somehow not a bit bad. It doesn't make him Satan or Beelzebub, but if he had said in the run-up to that referendum vote, Brexit is going to be brilliant for business, but by the way, I'll be moving the headquarters of my business to Singapore in early 2019, then it would have changed the nature of his contribution to the debate. No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. Context. You can't. How do you reason with people? Or how do you reason people out of a position into which they were not reasoned in the first place? And that's a question that, of course, hangs over American politics as well, where a not wholly unexpected, but nonetheless remarkable development has just unfolded. Simon Marks is LBC's Washington correspondent, and we refer to the arrest of Roger Stone. Give us a quick lowdown on who he is and how significant this development is, Simon.
Roger Stone, James, is Donald Trump's political fixer and political ally, and within the last hour, FBI agents have descended on his home in Fort Lauderdale in Florida, banging on the door at 6 o'clock in the morning, screaming at him to open the door, and they have arrested him on a whole series of charges following a federal grand jury indictment. He faces 7 counts, including false statements, witness tampering, and lying to congressional committees. He will be making an initial appearance later today in court in Florida, and the indictment goes into great detail about the crimes that Roger Stone is alleged to have committed. And for the first time, this is Robert Mueller, the special prosecutor, and the FBI making, in essence, a clear allegation of collusion against the Trump campaign. The indictment says that Roger Stone learnt that Julian Assange of WikiLeaks was about to publish the cache of emails that had been seized by Russian hackers from the Democratic Party's computer in the middle of 2016. That Roger Stone, through an intermediary and directly, got in touch with Julian Assange, holed up at the Ecuadorian embassy in London, and critically, and this is the most important piece of the indictment, that senior officials within the Trump campaign contacted Roger Stone and wanted to know what he knew and what more WikiLeaks had that they were planning to publish in a further bid to undermine Hillary Clinton's quest for the presidency. It will be almost impossible. I mean, nothing's impossible, of course, for Donald Trump, but almost impossible for President Trump any longer to claim that Robert Mueller's investigation has found no evidence of collusion. It is worth making the point that Robert Mueller has launched this FBI raid in the middle of a government shutdown where supposedly the FBI was having all sorts of difficulty getting personnel into the office. Well, they had no difficulty making this arrest at dawn in Florida. This is a dramatic moment. You said it had been expected, and indeed it had, but we did not know the level of detail that this indictment was going to go into, nor the very specific finger-pointing that the indictment engages in towards senior Trump officials.
I hesitate to say this, but it does rather make a mockery of a lot of journalism, doesn't it? Because Mueller is clearly just getting on with things very quietly behind the scenes with no trumpeting, no leaking, no press releases. We not so much you, but I spend my life speculating, whereas this development suggests that the heavy lifting is going on a million miles away from the studios and spotlights.
Yes, and I think the point is that the heavy lifting is still very much underway, and this may partly explain why Robert Mueller's office did issue that press release saying that some of the elements in the BuzzFeed story last week were not accurate. And, you know, you can say some people chose to interpret that as Robert Mueller's knocking the entire BuzzFeed story down. He wasn't so much knocking the BuzzFeed story down, much more nuanced than that, but also clearly, I think, sending a signal that that he is still very much knee-deep in his investigation. This is not an investigation, as President Trump's lawyer Rudy Giuliani said now more than 15 months ago, was in the throes of wrapping up. There's no indication this is an investigation that's wrapping up. It is still digging in, and to be going to Roger Stone's home at 6 o'clock in the morning. Roger Stone, a man who has made numerous media appearances, contributed, is the centerpiece of a documentary film in which he essentially thumbs his nose at the federal authorities, thumbs his nose at Robert Mueller and the FBI. This is Robert Mueller and the FBI getting their own back, and getting it back in spades, because this indictment has the potential to send Roger Stone to jail for a very long time, but much more importantly will be remembered as the first document that directly suggests something was going on between the Trump campaign, Roger Stone, WikiLeaks and the Russians, all of which was designed to undermine Hillary Clinton and essentially to break the law.
Any indications on whether they have any suspicions of who the emissary might be, the person close to Roger Stone and or Donald Trump who perhaps mysteriously turned up at the Ecuadorian embassy a couple of years ago?
Yeah, there is a person described in the indictment as person 2, who is a radio host on this side of the pond, who appears to have been one critical intermediary. But there are others mentioned in the indictment, including some kind of figure in the UK who made contact with Julian Assange. We don't yet know who that is. Need to read the indictment a little bit more closely in order perhaps fully to understand some of the nuance contained therein, but there will obviously be, I think, heightened interest on that side of the Atlantic into precisely who that individual is. Absolutely nothing yet, uncharacteristically, on Donald Trump's Twitter feed this morning. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. He hasn't tweeted since last night. We'll see what he has to say this morning about Roger Stone, but this is further evidence of another central figure very close to President Donald Trump, getting into all sorts of legal hot water. Paul Manafort, I think, is back in court, the Trump campaign's former campaign manager. He's back in court later today as he tries to fight to explain why the FBI is wrong when it alleges that he lied to them even after he struck a plea agreement with Robert Mueller, the special prosecutor. All of these guys, including President Trump, are now in increasing legal difficulty and jeopardy, and this is a huge scalp for Robert Mueller.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon Marks. The mystery then, of course, would be who associated with Roger Stone and or Donald Trump might have been running errands to the Ecuadorian embassy and having inexplicable meetings with Julian Assange. Riddle me this. 0345 606 0973 is the number you need. Should we carry on with a little bit of the search for common ground in the context of the Queen's comments re-Brexit? There can't be any common ground because, of course, until people who have either believed things that have turned out not to be true or people who have said things that have turned out not to be true admit that those things weren't true, there can be no common ground. And the minute they admit that they believed things that weren't true or said things that weren't true, the so-called will of the people becomes a nonsense, sadly. Big news that, I think, from America reflected there in the news bulletin. It's been covered, actually, quite widely, the run-up to this, the links with Roger Stone and similar. The Guardian published a fascinating article in June of 2017, which contained this quote from one source. One of the things the intelligence investigators have been looking at is points of contact and persons involved. If you triangulate Russia, WikiLeaks, Assange and Trump associates, the person who comes up with the most hits is Nigel Farage. He's right in the middle of these relationships. He turns up over and over again. There's a lot of attention being paid to him. That, of course, was in June 2017, so it may well be that attention led nowhere. We are in search of common ground today, and the common ground, as described by the Queen, would involve people on different sides of the Brexit debate coming together. We haven't had much joy in defining exactly what that common ground is. The closest we came was a Remain support group into which a Leaver was invited, but he had voted leave because he wanted more freedom of movement to be extended to all countries in the world, and it emerged during that meeting that if there were another referendum, he would in fact be a Remainer. So that's not really common ground. ground. The other analysis of what the common ground might be would be for people to stop telling the truth and pointing out lies on the other side, and instead accept that the other side won and press ahead with whatever it is they're now pretending that they wanted, having said in the run-up to the referendum that we would be enjoying sunny uplands, having our cake and eating it. There would be no downsides, only upsides. We would be conducting the easiest trade deal in human history. All of those things that people get very frustrated with you for pointing out, even though they're all true. So you're left with either saying, like the bloke we had, I always remember him, Jazz was it, in Crawley. That is quite opposite, actually, given that Trump's in the news, or Trump's associates are in the news. I'll never forget that moment. Live on the radio, describing to somebody who supported Donald Trump footage that we had all seen, actual things that we had seen with our own eyes. And with a straight face, Jazz in Crawley saying, fake news, fake news, fake news. Now that's the crasser end of the scale. But the other end of the scale, you have people with posher accents, perhaps, and plummier voices, chalk striped suits and public school education. They say that true things are not true, but they talk about taking it out of context, or not fully understanding the ramifications, or whatever it may be. It's the equivalent of just saying, here is something that actually happened, here is something that is true, and they say, no, it isn't, or they say, you're not being honest, which we also heard in the last hour. And that is why there can't be any common ground, because either people who were lied to admit they were lied to, admit that they believed lies. The German car industry did not need us more than we needed them. The European Union did not need us more than we needed them. All of these things aren't true. All of these platforms upon which people built their votes have fallen apart, but people aren't ready yet to blame the right people. They're still blaming the wrong people. And that's why I can't see what common ground looks like. And that's me, of course, also refusing to acknowledge the existence of any common ground until you actually admit that you nicked my Jaffa cakes. Once you admit that you've nicked my Jaffa cakes, then the common ground appears beneath our feet. Richard is in Richmond. What an agreeable juxtaposition of nomenclature. Richard, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm wondering if part of the problem here is that I think on the two sides of the Brexit debate, underneath what everybody believes and thinks and so forth, are potentially two different views of where they want the UK to be in the future. And perhaps a way to diffuse some of the emotion about Brexit is to have a discussion about what sort of UK do we want to be in 2030? Let's forget Brexit. What sort of country do we want the UK to be in 2030? Now, we know both sides kind of want to be a global Britain. There's a piece of common ground there.
Hang on. Sorry to interrupt already, but what does that even mean?
Well, you need to define your terms, I agree, otherwise you can't do a comparison.
I nearly jumped in when you said believes, because that, to me, seems part of the problem, not part of the solution. And then these phrases that can mean all things to all people, like global Britain. I would start, oddly, not by saying, what would we like to be like in 2030? I would say, what was wrong with how we were in 2015? And remind me how Brexit is going to improve that. And then I cautiously suggest that they can't. And then that's where the common ground disappears.
No, I mean, that's a way to make it specific, and that's a more tangible way to do it. Yes. And you've spoken to a lot of Brexiteers and lots of Remainers on your programme. I mean, I think it's a question for you. Where do you think the points of common ground are in terms of the people that you've spoken? So you just give up, do you?
No, I don't give up. Crikey, quite the opposite. I'm here every day with my trusty bat, taking all spin and googlies that are thrown at me, all sorts of accusations and horrors, and of course it gets worse the better you are at it. You know, when you say something's true and someone says you're dishonest, and you say, is what I said true, and they say yes, and they still think the conversation is going somewhere, I mean, that is despair. But that is a despair from which I derive the conclusion that there can be no common ground, because every single thing they said has not come true. That all that's left is a deliberate misunderstanding of what the word sovereignty means and a fetishisation of passport colour. There is nothing left. There hasn't been. When did I start saying passports and fish, passports and fish? It was about 18 months ago. We haven't moved an inch since then. So where's the common ground between people who are now pretending that they voted to be poorer and people who are pointing out that at the time they said they were voting Leave because they thought they'd be richer? I
think you also have to. You have to find a way, though, don't you? You have to find a way.
Well, what is the way? Because what you're going to get now is saying, "Oh, you've got to stop being so rude, or you've got to be more friendly." And you sort of say, "Well, we were friendly for 6 months. Everyone was like, okay, well, let's sit tight, see if it's good, see if it's better than we thought it would be." And then you had 2 years of "you lost, get over it," libtard Ramona, appalling rhetoric, all of this stuff. "I love your tears, dry your eyes, mate. You lost, get over it." And now they feel so stupid because we were right, that they're not going to suddenly cross over the floor and go, "Sorry, give us a hug, you were right, I was wrong." They're just going to ramp up the next level of insult and objection, culminating in cabinet-level ministers warning that if we don't do something stupid, fascists will get cross.
But I think you have to take it away from the Brexit discussion, don't you? You either have to have a discussion about where do we want to be, or you have to have a discussion about what was wrong with where we were.
Well, that is the point, and that's where it all falls apart. What was wrong with where we were? That's where Owen Jones interviewing Tim Martin about EU laws is so powerful, and that's why it became my catchphrase for the first year after the referendum. What law is it that you don't like? They haven't got one. But to turn around and say, "Oh, blimey, I voted on complete hogwash and ignorance." No one's ever going to say that. So where's the common ground?
Oh, you're going to...
There's no pleasure in this, but it's like when I refused to admit I'd stolen my friend's Jaffa cakes, and for the first time in 20 years of friendship, he went absolutely tonto. Because if somebody is lying to you plausibly, and you can't prove that they're lying beyond absolutely reasonable doubt, because they can say, in the context of my Jaffa cakes, the analogy falls down a bit, they can say, "All right, I can't prove it, but I promise things will get better. There's something just around the corner. There's something just over the horizon," which is why the ludicrous nonsense about Article 24 got reinflated yesterday. There must be something we can say when they're pointing out all the things we got wrong. Here is a completely spurious interpretation of a codicil of the GATT Treaty. Oh, OK, does anyone understand what it is? Not really. So if you say it quick enough, you just say Article 24, then people who don't really understand anything will go, that's interesting. So where's the common ground? Kim's in Brockley. Kim, what have you got?
Hi, mate. This is the first time I've spoken to you. I've listened to you quite a bit. Really enjoyed it. But it's a bit like listening to Richard Dawkins trying to argue with fundamentalists in the end.
I'll take that as a compliment, but it's not meant entirely as a compliment, is it?
Well, it is. It's engaging. I mean, it's hugely entertaining. And you can't argue with the fact. You've got the facts, and every time you destroy the arguments.
Yes, but that's because I'm not being honest, and it's all been taken out of context.
No, don't do that. Don't.
All right, sorry. Carry on.
But in the end, you see,
doesn't matter.
Actually, your programme slightly puts me off the idea of a second referendum, even though I'm absolutely with you. I think it's a disaster that we're leaving the EU, and I think, like you, I voted probably for the same reasons as you. I looked at the people who were telling me to vote Leave, and I thought, oh, not them, and I'm going the other way.
That's it. God, you have been paying attention, haven't you, Kim?
I was listening yesterday on the way to the dentist.
Oh, God.
So my problem is with the second referendum, you've been banging on for a couple of years, and you've made a few converts, but very few. And if your arguments aren't getting through, it worries me.
Yeah, me too. I mean, that's why I don't think there's common ground.
No, all right.
I'm with you. I think I'm with you. I'm also, for the record, I'm not that enthused by the prospect of a second referendum because there is such a hard and large rump of people. You see them cheering in TV debate programmes. They don't know what no deal is, but they believe people like Rees-Mogg when they say it will be great. It will be absolutely awful, but they don't believe you, and there's nothing you can do about it.
So somehow we have to find common ground because those people aren't moving.
Well, I don't think we will find any common ground.
Well, that kind of frustration is just going to lead to nihilism. That's the warning. I suppose, listen, common ground for me would be Norway plus, right? Yeah.
but that involves keeping freedom of movement, which means all the racists go bonkers, and that means all the other.
It's very interesting to hear you say that. I went down to Westminster the day of the meaningful vote.
Oh yeah.
It was quite interesting standing. There were Brexiteers and Remainers standing right next to each other, shouting their slogans, waving their banners, but actually right next to each other.
Yes.
You wouldn't get people going to a Chelsea-Tottenham match in the same situation.
I think it changed when the half-wits in the high-visibility vests turned up, but prior to that it had been quite civilised.
They weren't there the day I was there at all. And I finished up having a chat with a lady who was a leaver. And the main reason she said she was leaving in the end was she'd been part of a delegation that had gone to Brussels over a certain issue, and she felt she'd been brushed off by her MEP and a local.
And that's why she voted leave.
And in the end, yeah, but of course then she will buy into all the other rhetoric. What we finished up agreeing was if we both held our noses, I would, like you, accept Norway Plus, and she would accept Remain but Reform.
Remain but reform was always the case, but of course everyone disagrees about what reform means. I mean, in terms of damage limitation, that's why Theresa May's deal. That's why Rory Stewart sat here and tried to sell it to us, because it was a great way of actually reflecting 52-48. Neither the 52 nor the 48 are going to be happy with this. It nudges slightly in the direction of the 52 because it does actually involve leaving the European Union, but we're hanging on to as much of its benefits as we can. But look what the ERG did. They marched through the lobby on the other side, despite the fact that the two chairmen of the Vote Leave campaign voted against each other on the bill to leave the European Union. They still bleat about the will of the people. Kim, what a lovely call. Did the dentist go all right?
Sorry?
Did the dentist go all right?
Yeah, it's fine, actually. I've got a new bridge. It's very nice.
There we go. Glad to hear it. 12:16. Just trying to get my hands on that indictment of the key Trump associate, Roger Stone, who has been arrested on suspicion of a variety of offences in Florida this morning as a result of Robert Mueller's investigation into collusion between Donald Trump's campaign and the Kremlin. I think you're looking at... Well, we'll find out, but if I can just get hold of the relevant paragraph of the indictment, I will share it with you before 1 o'clock today. Very interesting stuff unfolding. Common ground. The Queen calls for us to find common ground. What does it look like? I having endured or enjoyed, depending on your perspective, more exchanges with more Brexiters than any Remainer in Britain, I don't think there is any. There might be common ground for moderate and sensible leavers, but I don't know that there are any moderate and sensible leavers left. I say that with great heaviness of heart. The contortions now being undertaken to pretend that what you're going to get is what you voted for are absurd. And moderate, sensible people, sadly, have done what always happens in cults and gone the way of the immoderate, insensible people. So if you voted because you thought the NHS was going to get more money, you voted in error. If you voted because you thought that your life had been damaged by European Union laws, you voted in error. If you voted because you felt that your life had been in any meaningful way damaged by European Union freedom of movement, you voted in error. If you voted because you thought we would somehow be able to establish trading arrangements superior to membership of the largest single market on the planet, then you voted in error. If you voted because you believed that there would be no downsides to Brexit, only upsides, then you voted in error. If you voted because you believed that you would be able to have your cake and eat it, an episode which, for me, fermented the corruption of that position. To stand up in public and say you can have your cake and eat it, you might as well have said, you stupid peasants. That was Boris Johnson essentially doing the Donald Trump line about shooting someone on Fifth Avenue and not losing a single vote. Let's see, just how contemptuously can I treat these plebs, Boris said to whichever lover he was with at the time. Just how contemptuously can I treat these plebs? I know, Boris. Why don't you tell them that a rolling stone does gather moss? No, that doesn't really work in the context of the Brexit debate. OK, why don't you tell them that too many cooks don't spoil the broth? No, because that's actually debatable. That wouldn't really prove that I think they're absolutely stupid. What could we say that would just prove how utterly stupid and credulous these people are? Well, we couldn't do the cake thing, could we? What do you mean? We couldn't say, vote Brexit, you'll be able to have your cake and eat it. Could we do that? Well, said Boris Johnson. Let's find out. It's 22 minutes after 12. Dan's in Leicester. Dan, where's the common ground?
Alan, mate, pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise.
I think there is a tiny bit of common ground, and it is tiny, but it's also a massive edifice.
Go on. You're a massive edifice.
Thank you. Right back at you. So, the things that we can agree upon are the things that we have no choice but to agree upon. And an example of this would be what Jacob Rees-Mogg put it really well in a speech he gave yesterday, or the day before, I think, where at the end of the speech he just sort of said, if all else fails, tick-tock goes the clock. So
the March the 29th deadline, I mean, we can all agree on that now, but then on Tuesday you've got all the amendments put before the House of Commons that might move those goalposts. But for the purposes of the weekend, we can all agree that unless something moves fast, on March the 29th, we crash out. But then we start arguing about what that means.
Yeah, but the point is that the bit that we can all agree upon is if everybody stands still and does nothing now,
yes,
on the 29th of March, we will leave the EU, right?
Yes.
Why is that? It's because it's enshrined in law.
Correct.
So the only things that we can agree upon, and this happened at the start of the process as well, when Gina Miller took her case to the Supreme Court, is that the only things that we can agree upon are stuff that are enshrined in law. They're the things that all Brexiters fall back upon, and when any Brexiter refuses to concede an argument, what they are basically saying is, we're in control now. Your fake news guy. What he was actually saying was, I'm in control and there's nothing you can do about it. What I want is enshrined in law. And you would have to agree on that point at this moment in time.
I mean, no one can argue with that because it is written down, but it's not. It doesn't say anything about what Brexit is, could be, or would be, does it?
Well, Brexit.
Because people will now start arguing. You heard the fella on the BBC last night claiming that WTO terms were good, and then essentially displaying absolute ignorance of the facts. Yeah. Rees-Mogg gets away with it a little better because he's a better performer in a studio, but WTO terms is an utterly meaningless phrase that's being used as a fig leaf. So I can agree with you about what happens on March the 29th unless we grow up fast, but that's all I can agree with you on. That's not common ground, is it, really?
Well, the law is the law.
That's what I mean. This is about common ground between differing opinions, not common ground about numbers. No one's going to deny that March the 29th comes after March the 28th.
Yeah, but this is the bad news and the good news.
Yes,
is that all we are going to be able to agree upon is that the March 29 deadline exists.
That's not what Her Majesty meant, mate. That's not what Her Majesty meant. No. She's not saying we all need to use the same calendar. She was making a more profound point than that, Dan, surely. She
was. But what I take from it, and the only place where I think Brexit is resolvable is in law, and that's the point. Brexit has broken politics and political discourse. It's broken truth and fact. It's broken relationships and any common cultural ground that we share. Mm-hmm. And guess what? It also probably broke the law.
I don't think there's any probably about it, is there?
No, exactly. But at some point, I have 100% faith that the law, in its slow and inexorable way, will prove that Brexit was achieved illegally. And that is the common ground that we share. We are all subject to that.
But people will already say both sides lied. So you give evidence of a crime and they say, oh, yeah, but look at the emails in America. Look at what's happening in America now. Donald Trump's key allies falling like 9 pins, potentially. Yeah. I mean, how many of them are already in jail? Do you honestly think that Donald Trump's core support is now moving towards the common ground, that their side committed considerably worse calumnies and crimes than Hillary Clinton's email server represents?
That's the point, though, because at some point Mueller is going to knock on Donald Trump's door, and it won't matter. The law is the law.
Yeah, but his fan. I think we're in agreement with each other. We've just got a slightly different understanding of what common ground means. You're describing reality.
Yeah, sorry about that.
And they're still denying it, mate. So the common ground between, you're right, eventually reality will be established, but people will still deny it. You heard the bloke in Dulwich earlier. You're being dishonest, James. What I said true? Yes, it is, but you're being dishonest. I mean, how do you find common ground with that?
Well, the thing is, you don't have to, because let's say, for example, you know this problem that we have at the moment where ministers are saying we have to kind of appease the nutters, because if we don't, they will behave like nutters and things will go south. So that's...
Yeah, but that's where we are now. We've got Sue Ellen Braverman and Chris Grayling saying, no, we've got to do this thing, even though it's awful. They don't admit yet that it's awful, but we've got to do it. Otherwise the actual fascists will get cross. Where's the common ground with them?
Well, there's no common ground, but let's say the fascists get cross and put a few, I don't know, office chairs through shop windows and stuff. At some point, the cell door's going to close on them.
Well, you have enormous faith in the rule of law. And of course, the rise of fascism historically always involves the fall of rule of law. It's why Paul Dacre's headline about High Court judges, enemies of the people, was so viciously dangerous and democratically damaging. But how many people on the Brexit side of the debate are going to agree that the enemies of the people or the Crush the Saboteurs or the Our Remainer University's front pages of the country's most influential newspaper were disgusting? Not for a long time. And I think, Dan, that definition of reality is really relevant. Because I think you're saying, well, eventually you can't deny reality. So you know what I pull out of my sack at this point, don't you, Dan? I don't know how keenly you listen to the programme, but it's pretty obvious who I'm going to point at now.
Go for it.
Naked Emperor over there, mate.
Yeah, there's a certain point where it ceases to be a matter of opinion now.
I envy you, because I'm still standing next to people who think the Emperor is wearing, or at least they're still publicly insisting that the Emperor is wearing beautiful robes. I say he's naked, they say, stop being dishonest.
Mm.
I want a bit of what you're on, though.
Thank you.
Let's swap jobs for a week. Let's swap jobs for a week and then come back and see where we are. I just got my hands on the text of this indictment involving Roger Stone and the charges brought by special counsel. I was interested in the identity, particularly of individual 2. I'll share with you the relevant lines once I've checked that I'm fully allowed to, in the context of British law, not in the context of professional embarrassment or anything like that. That can't possibly apply when it comes to news. 12:30 is the time. This is quite an interesting line from that Roger Stone indictment that's just been published by the FBI. Get to the head of Organisation 1. Get to the head of Organisation 1 at Ecuadorian Embassy in London and get the pending Organisation 1 emails. They deal with Foundation, allegedly. And then on or about the same day, person 1 forwarded Stone's email to an associate who lived in the United Kingdom and was a supporter of the Trump campaign. Curiouser and curiouser, said Alice. Claudia is in Grosseto in Italy, so you are clearly a citizen of nowhere. What would you like to say, Claudia?
Hi, James. No, you asked about common ground.
I did. I did.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, for me, common ground means a shared interest and shared beliefs. So, in relation to...
But that's not
Brexit
common. I think
moment.
she's talking about common ground between people who have different beliefs. People who have the same beliefs don't need to search very hard for common ground.
Well, no, because we all want the best for Britain and we all want the best for ourselves as individuals.
Yes,
so that is
but we're not going to
ground,
agree over what it is, are we?
No, definitely not. But I think that what maybe the Queen is trying to say is that whatever side of the argument you are on, we respect each other's point of view without belittling
But
anyone.
how can you respect a point of view that's built on a falsehood? That's really dangerous, historically.
Yes, and that's the whole problem, isn't it? We all, these days, don't know what to believe because on either side...
No, it's easy to know. It's easy to know what to believe.
No, I think that there's been a lot of fake news on both sides.
No, you see, there hasn't.
Really?
This is part of the problem. There were predictions made during the campaign by people on the Remain side that have turned out not to be true. But there are statements made and crimes committed by the Leave side. So the whole idea of false equivalence, in fact, with the greatest of love and respect, the very fact that you try to impute some sort of equivalence between the two sides is the reason why I don't think there can be any common ground. Because decent, nice, informed people like you still think that the Remain side is in any way comparable to the corruption and the dishonesty of the Leave side. So there can never be any common ground because you're not going to admit that because you lean towards leaving.
Then you see, you've based your opinions
It's not an opinion.
on your own experience.
No, it's not an opinion.
And decisions.
I don't have any
Yes,
opinions.
It is an opinion.
I don't have any
yes,
opinions.
So you do. We all have opinions.
I am an
believe
opinion-free
me.
zone.
Okay. And what? Very well.
That's
so
my
what
opinion.
we choose to believe and what we
No,
choose
but you can't
reject
choose to
is
believe something that is demonstrative. Look, here's a piece of moon rock. You can't choose to believe that it's cheese in the sense that you mean. Brexit is people with their hands full of stones claiming that they believe it's cheese.
So shall I give you a personal thing that whereby I don't believe what the Remain side are saying from something I heard on the news. So this is my personal experience, okay, that forms my opinion, which is that all the banks are leaving and going to Ireland.
That's not been said on the news, and if that has been said on the news, either they misspoke or you misheard.
Well,
it's
34%. There you go, because
34%.
Are you saying that I'm lying?
No.
Are you saying that I'm lying?
No, I'm telling you what the numbers are.
Well, I'm telling you, I heard this on the news yesterday.
You heard them
They
say
were saying,
all the banks are going to Ireland.
That's right.
All the banks are going to Ireland. You heard on the news.
That's right. And I have.
What news? Can I ask what news bulletin you were listening to? No, because I need to clarify what news you were listening to. You might have been listening to Play School. What news bulletin was it on?
I listened to loads. I listened to loads of news.
So when did you hear that?
I heard it yesterday.
Yes, but where on what station?
Yeah. So just a minute, James.
No, this is the whole point. You've said something, and I'm examining it.
No, James. I don't play your games, really.
This isn't a game.
I don't play your
you just
games.
said
you listen me out, or I don't. I don't listen to you.
Just tell me what news bulletin it was.
Do you want to know what I'm going to say?
Yes. What news bulletin?
Because I listen to so many news stations. I don't know, but this has been said.
Well, I don't believe you.
Well, that's fine, because I don't believe
you must have misheard.
James, so
well, I can point you to loads of bulletins where that wasn't said. You have to point me, at least in a tiny way, towards where you heard a newsreader say all the banks are moving to Ireland.
I heard a newsreader say, and it has been said many times, that the banks are going to leave the city.
Some banks.
It has.
Some
many
banks.
times.
Some banks.
Very well.
Some banks.
Do you want to hear the rest of my story, James, or do you to live in your James O'Brien opinionated world?
It's not an opinion.
Well, you are opinionated, James.
It's not an opinion.
You really are.
Nobody.
You should try and
nobody.
yourself
nobody on the news has. No, it's not my fault that you're
Claudia. Until it goes your way. No, James.
It's not my fault you're embarrassed.
It's your radio program, so you call the shot.
I'm not calling any shots. I'm asking you a question.
Yes, you are.
Okay.
No, and I'm telling you an answer, but you don't want to listen.
I'm listening.
I'm listening. How you go. Okay, my nephew works in bank in London. He works for a bank. I won't say which one it is. And he said it is not the case. He said that they are registering in Ireland, but they are not taking their photocopiers and their offices and moving physically to Ireland.
But nobody said they were.
I want to make.
Nobody said they. Nobody said they were. No, Claudia. Nobody. You see what you've done. You've come on and you've said something. I heard on the news that all the banks are moving to Ireland. I said I'm pretty sure that hasn't been on the news. You then said yes, it has, and shouted at me. And now you've cited your nephew saying that all the banks aren't moving to Ireland without being able to tell me who it was, when it was, or where it was that any reputable news site claimed or news source claimed that all the banks are moving to Ireland. So, I mean, I'm going to let you talk a bit more because I sense otherwise you'll be cross.
Well, basically, you say, oh, well, all the Brexiteers, we're all stupid.
No, you're not all stupid. Cleverest
liars.
Person I know voted leave.
Yes, I know. But what I'm saying is I live in Italy, so I have a different experience. And I formed different
Was it on the
opinions
Italian news?
Somebody like you.
Was it on the Italian news that they said all the banks?
It wasn't on. No, it wasn't. It was on either. It was on something. It may have been BBC because I listen to a lot of BBC.
Azalea Banks is in Dublin at the moment. Azalea Banks is in Azalea Banks is in Dublin at the moment. Could it have been that you heard?
Yes. I have no idea, and I would be telling a lie if I told you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you find if you find that bulletin, or if you remember, and it does say all banks are moving to Ireland, then please send it to me. Okay? Because right now, I find that impossible to believe. Which doesn't mean that you're lying. It just means that you misheard or that you've misunderstood what you did hear. Banks are relocating to various different centres. They will still leave people here. They're not going to. I can't even explain it to you. All banks are moving to Ireland. Common ground. Kate's in Nice, in France. Kate, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So first-time caller. I'm a bit nervous, but
It's only me. Don't worry. This is bound to go better than the last call.
I hope so. I'm afraid, though, I haven't got an answer for you. I was really just wanting to share, this whole idea of common ground. For me, I think one of your earlier callers said this. One would hope you get to common ground, if there's shared interest, right?
Yes.
But just talking from my own point of view, as you mentioned, so I'm British. I live in France. I work in the UK, so I'm back and forwards every week. So in a very, very real way, everything that happens with Brexit really, really affects me at a very personal level for me and my family. My mum is an ardent Brexiteer.
Oh.
And,
still,
you can imagine, right, the rift. I mean, this really speaks to your show on Monday. But, even trying to find common ground is impossible. I mean, even when I talk to her about saying, look, I talk about the very real way it affects me. So, for example, we crash out without a deal.
Yes.
I'd get to about July and I wouldn't be able to go home because I would have exceeded the number of days, So
what does your mum say when you tell her that?
Well, she basically says, she talks about all the stuff that, she talks about, being under the jackboot of Germany. She talks about, it's all worth it for the greater good, for independence, for sovereignty, for all this stuff, and it's so ill-informed. The thing for me that's made this even worse, actually, with our relationship is that, actually the day after referendum, I started going through the process to get dual nationality because I was, I thought for me it was the only way I could take control and assure my future. And now I am dual French-British, and she's furious with me about that because she feels that I'm betraying Britain.
Yeah, but it's also, she's furious with you about that because that does momentarily make her think that she's done something wrong. My own daughter has had to take out dual nationality. That doesn't tally with the idea of us being freer.
Well,
or more independent. I don't know. I mean, I don't know your mum, but I'm just trying to give her...
She's so... Yeah, I know, thank you. She's so caught up on this idea of, escaping the clutches of Germany. And this sort of delusion of,
So how do you find common ground?
Collateral damage that's acceptable,
Yes. Well, that's where we are now. I mean, you've literally got them saying it might not be that bad, and the EU might let us keep some of the things that we currently don't need their permission to keep. That's what victory looks like. That's what taking back control looks like.
Exactly.
Where's the common ground between you and your mum? Do you just not talk about it?
Well, we don't really talk at all now.
Okay.
It's really, it's terrible. And, as I say, listening to your show on Monday, I was listening with tears in my eyes, but also feeling, it's terrible. But, knowing there are other people out there who've gone through the same thing or going through the same thing, but it's really tragic.
It's heartbreaking.
We don't really talk because I know I've tried and I probably don't try enough. But the reality is it becomes very personal very quickly. And, you start to question...
You just have to... I said, I know the call you're referring to now on Monday. I'd forgotten it, actually, but it was the fellow who's not talking to his mum, and I said, you have to. You have to. You just have to park it. And it's easy for me to say, sitting in my cosy London studio with no real threat to my livelihood posed by Brexit. My hopes of retiring to the Peloponnese are possibly slightly compromised, but I'm entitled to an Irish passport. It's much, much harder for you to be cool and calm with your mum because her vote could conceivably turn your life upside down.
Well, and for now, and this is where, for me, you know what? Actually, I'm okay because I've got this dual citizenship. It was really hard to get it. Took me over 2 years. But as I say, it's a whole thing of common ground. I don't know how my mum and I will ever find that common ground again because it's so... damage that root. And as I say, when it's so prosaic as just being shared interest of what's best for family.
Yeah, my own daughter in this case. And what does she get that makes it worthwhile for you to lose X, Y, and Z? And the answer is I don't know. And that's where we are, so many of us. And this is neatly put, a neat little... précis of the caller before, Kate. Claudia in Italy. I heard this claim about banks. James says, where? Caller says, I can't remember. James says, so there's no evidence the claim exists, never mind that it's true. Caller says, you just interrupt people all the time. How dare you not let me spout spurious claims unchallenged? And that's what we've come to as a country. That's what we've been turned into by putting liars on prominent platforms, by putting liars on Question Time. There's no shame in believing lies that are told plausibly. There's no shame at all. We've all done it. We've all fallen for either deliberate dishonesty or mistakes that politicians have made. We've all done it. There's no shame in admitting it. But if you end up claiming things that are, at the very least, highly unlikely to be true, and at the very most, demonstrably and definitively false, I don't know how we find common ground. I say something true, you say I'm being dishonest. I ask, is what I said true? You say yes, but you still say I'm being dishonest. You say you heard on the news that all the banks are moving to Ireland. I say, that's not been on any news I'm aware of. Can you remember where it was? You say, how dare you interrupt me? Where's the common ground? It's 12:47. How can people find common ground? How can there be common ground between people who either tell or believe lies and people who don't? It's a tough ask, and I'm not sure we've enjoyed unparalleled success in answering it, although you are reminded as you enjoy the sort of ding-dongs and rhetorical flourishes and embarrassments of the real experiences of people like Kate and her mum. I feel equally sorry for both of them. Kate is a victim of the toxification of this debate just as much as her mother is, albeit that Kate can see through the toxification. She loves her mum more than she loves being right. Imagine your mum getting cross with you for taking out dual nationality, which you needed to do because of something she voted for. Akil is in Leicester. Akil, what does the common ground look like?
How you doing, James?
Good.
It doesn't look like good at all. It's my. I was hoping to follow from. Is it Claudia's call from Italy?
Did you hear that news bulletin? Did you hear it?
Yeah, I was thinking to myself, forget about finding common ground between all the opposing sides of Brexit. It's just we need to find some common ground between you and Claudia.
Yes.
But it was an
Well, it'd be
interesting...
easy to find common ground. We just listened to the news bulletin where it said that all the banks are going to Ireland.
Going to the island. Wait, at the conversation you had with her, she said that, we all just need to respect each other and that's the common ground. And you jumped in, and said that, no, but we can't respect falsehood. Now, there and there, I think you were both wrong. So
I like
we can all respect each other's beliefs,
No, stop. Beliefs. You can't respect each other's beliefs if they're polar opposites of each other.
Well, hang on. So
also,
I'm a religious man, and
you believe it's raining. You believe it's raining. I'm standing outside, and it's not raining.
Hang on.
I'm hanging.
I'm a religious man. You're a religious man. I'm a Muslim. You're Catholic.
I'm not a religious man. I am a Catholic, but I wouldn't describe myself as religious.
Catholic.
Yeah.
We both respect our beliefs. The problem with Brexit,
hang on a minute. I don't know what your beliefs are. I respect your belief in God, and to a degree, on a good day, I share it. But there's an awful lot of stuff you believe that I probably don't respect. But I don't want to fall out.
Okay, cool. We're not going to fall out. I've listened to your audio book twice.
Good.
And I was going to come to that point in a minute, but we'll skip that. What?
And we're not talking about beliefs. We're talking about observable facts.
No, okay. But
so you can believe that you heard something on the news, but unless you can show it to me, I can't respect your belief if it sounds like it's nonsense.
We are talking about observable facts versus beliefs. The problem with Brexiteers, Remainers, is that as a Remainer, I believe that those who support Brexit do so on a prayer, a hope, a wish, a belief.
Exactly.
There's slogans and phrases that are thrown around. Last night on Question Time, Suella Braverman, and even your friend, I'm allowed to say Nick, mention Nick.
Yes, he is my friend, so don't be rude.
Your friend Nick.
He didn't pull out his divorce line, did he?
I'm not going to be rude, but both of them thrown out, on 3 occasions, we can hold the EU to ransom with the 39 billion. Hang on, but they're already making preparations for a no deal where they know they're not going to get the 39 billion anyway. So we can't hold them to ransom. But anyway, but it fosters the belief. That phrases and slogans, meaningless phrases and slogans like that, foster the belief that Brexit is going to be great.
And it's still going on.
She was bouncing up and down in her chair. Suella Braverman in 2016.
Mate, we're going to run out of time. We're going to run out of time, and I've got Paul in Wolverhampton on the other line.
I was just going to say that basically, as a Muslim, if I try to impose my belief on anyone else, it's completely unconscionable. We can't.
Yeah, but that's the difference between beliefs and observable facts. And in many ways, I think that we're in agreement, even though you thought we weren't when you rang in. We are, because you can't have common ground between people who believe something contrary to what the observable facts say. You will never have common ground between somebody who's holding a piece of moon rock insisting that it's cheese and somebody who's holding a piece of moon rock pointing out, thanks to mineral analysis, that it's moon rock. And that's where we are. It doesn't matter whether they're on Question Time or drinking out of a paper bag under a subway. There is truth and then there is untruth. There are news bulletins that happened and then there are news bulletins that never happened. There are claims that can be proven to be true and there are claims that can be proven to be false. You can't have common ground between the truth and the lie. And Brexit is a lie. On every level. Every single level. And there can be no common ground except the common ground where we congregate in that admission. Kate's mum's not ready for it yet. Claudia's not ready for it yet. Your man in Dulwich earlier isn't ready for it yet. None of them are ready for it yet because it involves saying, oh, silly me. And everyone hates saying silly me. Paul's in Wolverhampton. Paul.
Yeah, hi. Good afternoon, James.
You've got 2 minutes straight. Make it sing.
Right. In a nutshell, right? Common ground for me in Brexit, the pursuit of liberty is never a vice, only a virtue. And
yes, but then you argue over what liberty means, mate, and that is not common ground.
No, liberty and freedom is all about nation, government.
It's all about what?
Of the people, by the people. It's all those great things that we've spent hundreds of years building and accepting from Magna Carta onwards.
Yes.
And
so why are we undoing them?
We're not undoing them.
You see, there goes the common ground. You think liberty means some nebulous theoretical idea. I think that we were pretty free. Have you spent your life unfree?
Let me ask you a question.
No,
James.
I just asked you one. Have you spent your life unfree?
Do you believe?
Here's the common ground.
That liberty and freedom is more important than economics?
Oh, it depends what you mean by liberty and freedom, Paul.
I just told you, self-determination, self-government, government of the people, for the people, by the people.
Well, I think we already have that.
Freedom.
We already have that.
No, we do not have that with all the Japanese knotweed that's intertwining us with the EU.
Right, you are. So you spent your whole life not free?
No, I didn't say that.
You did?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. Don't put words in my mouth. I said
so you are
that
free.
We need to be free of the European Union in order to get our liberties and our freedoms back to what they were.
What? Okay, here we go, because we're going to run out of time. What is the freedom you don't currently have, the one you're most looking forward to having on March the 30th? Your personal freedom.
Everything I vote for, it's an election. If I've got a problem, I go and see my MP. He or she doesn't say, "Oh, I can't really do anything about that because that's all under the auspices of Europe."
And for example, then the thing that they can't do anything about because it's under the auspices of Europe, what would be on that list of things?
Well, it could be work regulations.
Which work regulation don't you like?
Fisheries, agriculture.
Yeah, so do you work in fisheries or agriculture?
No, but I know
okay, so
some
what's the work
fishermen
regulation that you are looking forward to not having to abide by anymore?
Okay, I'm looking forward to our fishermen being able to.
But you're not a fisherman, and all of the working time regulations and the directives protecting workers were passed by our own Parliament, in which the MP that you're going to go and visit with a long list of grievances that turns out to be a blank piece of paper, which you then screw up and throw in the bin and just start sort of mewling liberty without even knowing what you mean by the word. And that's why there's no common ground, Paul. It's not my fault. It's coming out to 1 o'clock. Have a lovely weekend.